Martinka, and what I'd like to talk to you about today is businesses that aren't ready for sale. We hear a lot about preparing a company for sale, about getting it ready, use whatever term you want, prepared, groomed, anything. Why is it important? And here are 3 examples of why it's important, because these owners really weren't ready, at least at first. George was as deflated as a balloon that hits a pin and goes scurrying around a room when I said to him, nobody will buy your business. You see, George had a company that was competing with him and his outside hobbies. He paid attention to the business when he needed to. He didn't pay attention to it when things were going good. Of course, every time things were going good, he didn't pay attention to it, it went down. He had to pay attention to it. It looked like a sine wave of growth of sales and profits. But the upsides were never good enough to cover the downsides. So by the time I met him, he was in the hole. He owed the bank money, he owed his vendors money, he didn't have enough money coming in. But what he did have was a good business model. And we determined pretty quickly that if he was to sell it, he had to stabilize his sales and marketing. He had to be showing profit regularly. It was a revenue problem more than anything else. July 1st, we put in a sales and marketing plan. Summer's traditionally slow. They concentrated on sales, they concentrated on marketing, they documented everything that they did. By the end of the year, they were 1/3, 33% ahead of projected sales for the last 6 months of the year. That continued on into the next year. And by that time, we had 2 industry players interested in buying the company. We actually got an offer from one of them. But the offer wasn't good enough, because now the business was doing well and George didn't feel compelled to sell. So fast forward 5 years. This buyer came back and other things had been done in the business, but sales had stabilized, had grown consistently. George received a cash down payment at closing larger than the total offer 5 years before. That's why you need to be ready to sell your company, to do the little things. Every company has specific little things they can do to become more attractive to a buyer. Here's another example. And this one didn't turn out as good for the seller, because the seller was the husband of the owner. The owner had died, she had been sick for a couple years, but there's a good staff. So the business continued on, and the economy was very strong. All of a sudden we have the Great Recession hit in 2008. We found out that this business ran at about a year and a half lag to the economy. It didn't start showing signs of trouble until the end of 2009. By that time, it was almost too late, but there was a buyer there. And the buyer got a great situation, because the owner, the widower, told us he only signed the checks. Every check that went out the door, he had to sign, because he wanted the employees to think he was actually paying attention to the business. But he really wasn't. So what he got was a little bit of money and an earnout. In other words, he will get paid only if the business grows, and grows to a certain level over the first few years. But what was his downside? If this buyer wasn't in place, he'd be out of business, had closed the doors, had to pay off bills out of personal funds, because it was on a steady downhill, because it just wasn't being managed properly. Third situation, when you have a business, what you want to do is have as many buyer possibilities as possible for when it comes time to sell. This particular company had painted itself into a corner. It was such a niche business, and it required such specific skills that only someone in their industry could buy them. And in that industry at the time, there were 2 players buying small companies, growing by acquisition. And so there were really only 2 logical potential buyers for this company. One of them stepped forward, made a decent offer. The sellers realized it was all they were going to get. But the buyer controlled things. And the buyer came in and demanded that all approximately 20 employees sign a very strict non-compete agreement. Now, the lawyer said it's probably not enforceable, but it didn't matter. It scared the pants off of a couple employees who almost didn't sign. The seller had to make some concessions to the employees financially to get them to sign that non-compete agreement. But again, it was the seller's fault. They weren't in a strong position to attract a wide variety of buyers. So again, they had painted themselves in a corner. If you own a business and you're thinking, I can just sell it, if someone's going to pay me because it's a great company, keep in mind, you've got to be doing all the things right. And all the things right mean having the business ready for someone who may not have industry experience to step in and take over. That's what preparing a business for sale really is all about. Thank you.